There are certain afternoons in Oregon that feel like time itself is dissolving in the air. The soft sunlight stretches across the maple trees lining the street, wind rustles lazily through the leaves, and I stand behind the window, holding a cup of coffee that has long gone cold. Daniel's car slowly backed out of the stone-paved driveway. I watched until it disappeared around the corner. Another business trip, his third this month. I couldn't even remember the last time we had dinner together without a laptop or phone between us. We used to love each other deeply. That much I'm certain of. But love wears thin easier than people like to admit. It doesn't always shatter from screaming matches. Sometimes it simply fades, bit by bit, with each passing day that's too quiet. Until one day you wake up next to a stranger and realize that stranger is your husband. I pushed that thought aside and walked out to the backyard. The roses needed pruning, and I needed something, anything, that made me feel like I still existed. The sound of a truck engine broke the usual silence next door. I looked up. A silver pickup had pulled into the driveway of the house that had been empty for months. Someone new was moving in. I tried not to be too curious, but it was hard. A man stepped out of the truck, tall, solid build, black fitted t-shirt clinging to his frame, jeans dusty with the road. I couldn't see his face clearly from this distance, but there was something about the way he moved, calm, assured, that made me want to keep watching. When he looked up and met my eyes across the fence, I startled slightly. He smiled, a small, easy smile, not forced, not polite, real. "Hi," he said, his voice low and warm. "Hi, welcome to the neighborhood," I replied, suddenly self-conscious, still holding my gardening shears. "I'm Jake Nolan. Emily. I live right here, just next door." "Nice to meet you, Emily." He gave a short nod, then turned and lifted a box into the house. I stood there a moment longer, heart beating a little off rhythm. It wasn't that he was extraordinarily handsome or movie star charming. It was just, it had been so long since a man looked at me like I was there. That night, I couldn't focus on writing. My blog drafts, 10 ways to refresh your summer kitchen, how to care for rose bushes, suddenly felt hollow. I opened a bottle of wine, not because I needed it, but because I needed to feel something. Jazz played softly from the speaker on my desk, but all I could hear was the echo inside me. Through the window, I caught sight of Jake up on the roof, adjusting what looked like a solar panel, his hair tasseled in the wind, but his movements calm and grounded. I knew I should turn away. I'm a married woman. I'm not someone who daydreams like a teenager, but it was hard to look away from something that made me feel alive. I set the glass down and told myself that tomorrow I'd be busier, that I was just tired, that it was nothing. But when I lay in bed that night, I still carried with me the image of Jake Nolan's eyes, his smile, a soft reminder that sometimes a single glance is all it takes to wake a sleeping soul. I used to think I was familiar with silence, but it turns out there are different kinds of silence. That morning, as I was making coffee, I heard a light knock on the porch. At first, I thought it was a delivery, but when I opened the door, there he was, Jake, holding a coil of wire and wearing a smile like morning sunshine. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "I'm fixing up the back porch light, but I'm missing a few tools. Would you happen to have a screwdriver?" I nodded, a bit awkwardly. "Sure, give me a second." I went into the garage to grab Daniel's toolbox. He always kept it neat,
and labeled, though he rarely used it. I handed the kit to Jake, and for the briefest second, his gaze met mine. Soft, but enough to make my skin tingle like wind brushing through a thin shirt. "Thanks," he said. "I'll return it right away." I don't know why I offered the next words. "Do you need someone to hold the ladder?" He turned, surprised, then smiled again. "Only if you don't mind." I didn't mind. God, I didn't mind at all. We stood in his backyard, still messy with half-unpacked pots, trailing cords, and a box of untouched bulbs. I held the ladder steady while he climbed, reaching up to fix the porch light under the eaves. "I heard you work from home?" he asked from above, his voice cutting gently through the quiet. "Yeah, I write a lifestyle blog. Mostly gardening, decorating, soft stuff." "Seems fitting," he replied, not looking down. I laughed, a little shy. "What about you? I'm guessing an artist." "Close. Photographer. Not weddings or studios, though. I like natural moments. Ordinary life. Like this morning." He climbed down the ladder holding a camera. I hadn't even noticed it slung over his shoulder. "Mind if I—" He raised the camera slightly, asking with his eyes. I hesitated, but nodded. Click. Once. Then again. I turned my face away. I'm not used to being photographed. "That's why the picture will be beautiful," he whispered. I didn't know if he was meaning it or if he was just being charming, but in that moment, I smiled. Truly smiled for what felt like ages. It rained the next day. Not a downpour, just a soft, misty kind of rain. The kind that feels like the sky is quietly yearning for something it can't quite name. I sat by the window, a cup of hot tea in my hands, watching droplets trail down the fence that separated my yard from Jake's. My thoughts refused to drift elsewhere. The way he looked at me yesterday, the soft click of his camera, the feeling that someone had finally seen me. Not the blog writer, not Daniel's wife, but simply me. His text came just before noon. "Jake. Rainy day. Opened a bottle of wine I probably shouldn't finish alone. Interested?" My hands trembled just slightly. I didn't think too long. I replied, "I'm coming." Jake's house was warmer than I expected. Not in temperature, but in feel. The scent of fresh wood, leather furniture, and something softly spiced in the air. Jazz music played low from a small speaker on a shelf. He wore a light gray shirt, the top buttons casually undone. The amber lighting touched his face just right, like something out of a film. In that moment, I felt like I'd stepped into a different life, one where I wasn't Daniel's wife, one where I was simply a woman. We sat across from each other, wine glasses in between. He asked if I drank often. I said, "I like the silence that comes after a sip. You?" He said he preferred the silence before the first. I laughed gently, and in his eyes, I saw something unhurried, something honest, and yes, something hungry. We didn't speak for a while. The rain and the jazz filled the space between us, weaving a rhythm that made me feel strangely close to this man I barely knew. Jake poured more wine. His fingers brushed mine as he handed the glass. Barely a touch, but I felt it across every inch of my skin. I didn't pull away.
I looked at him, really looked at him. "You're beautiful when you're quiet," he said, his voice softer now, like you're listening to things the world hasn't found the courage to say. I didn't know why I let him, but when his hand rested lightly on my thigh, steady, respectful, I didn't flinch. He stood slowly and walked over, sitting next to me on the couch. There was no more fence, no more distance, no more labels between us. "I won't touch you unless you want me to," he whispered as time ran out. I turned my face toward his and looked into his eyes. Deep, gentle, and something in them said he would wait. I nodded, softly but truthfully. His lips met mine, warm, slow, like a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. His kiss wasn't demanding, it asked, and I answered with every part of me. We didn't rush. Jake didn't tear off my clothes like he was taking something. He undressed me as if he were uncovering something precious, something long buried under expectations, silence, and years of being seen, but not truly seen. Each time his lips grazed my skin, I felt myself waking from a long, cold sleep. In the golden lamplight, I felt my body slowly revealed, every curve, every breath, every scar. Jake leaned close and whispered in my ear, his voice like the hush of summer air. "Do you know, you're beautiful enough to make time want to stop." I moaned softly as his mouth traced its way to my breast. Nothing rough, nothing hurried, just reverent. His hands, his skin, the heat of his breath, everything melted into me. And when he finally entered me, I wasn't Emily, the lonely wife in a cold marriage. I was a woman, alive, open, desperate to be touched in ways that meant something. We stayed wrapped around each other long after, silent, breathing. Because sometimes silence is more intimate than any whisper. When I walked back home, the rain had stopped. The wooden fence still glistened with droplets under the street lamp. I paused for a moment and looked back at Jake's house. He stood under the porch light watching me, not calling me, not asking me to stay, just watching. And in that look, I knew nothing would ever be the same again.
I didn't go home. Not really. I just returned. The house, mine and Daniel's, looked the same as yesterday, last week, last month, but I wasn't the same. I was strange even to myself. When I stood in the bathroom and looked in the mirror, I had to touch my own cheek just to be sure it was me, Emily Carter. But someone who had just woken up from years of being numb. I didn't sleep that night. I lay beside the pillow Daniel usually rested on, smelling the familiar soap he used, but it didn't make me feel safe anymore. It made me feel distant. In my mind was Jake's breath, his hands at my waist, the words he whispered against my skin between the rising rhythm of our bodies. There was something in him that melted me, not just the desire, but the fact that he wanted me, not out of habit, not obligation, just me. We didn't talk about what happened the next day, but Jake sent me a photo. It was me from the day before, holding the ladder, my hair wild from the wind, a quiet, effortless smile on my lips. Beneath it, he'd written, "If only you knew how you look when you're not guarding yourself." I didn't know how to reply. I just stared at the photo for a long time. and smiled, tired but honestly happy. Daniel came home Thursday night. Same suitcase, same busy eyes, a kiss on the forehead instead of my lips. He asked, "You eaten?" I nodded. "Yeah, cold noodles." We didn't hug. We didn't talk much. He went straight to his laptop after a shower. And I washed last night's wine glass with trembling hands. I was cheating on him. And the worst part wasn't that he didn't know. It was the quiet, aching thought that even if he did, I wasn't sure he'd care. I saw Jake again Saturday morning. I was watering the plants when I heard his voice from the fence. "You never gave back the smile you borrowed." I looked up. He was leaning against his railing, coffee mug in hand, the morning sun catching the honey in his hair. "I don't remember borrowing anything," I teased. "Then I'll come and take it back." He walked toward the gate between our yards. I didn't move. Hose still in my hand, heart pounding. He stood close, too close. The scent of wood and worn leather from his shirt surrounded me like a memory. Jake leaned in, whispering, "I can't look at you like just another neighbor anymore." I bit my lip, saying nothing. His hand brushed my arm, warm, firm, then rested at my waist. I turned my face, not to stop him, but to allow. And he kissed me. In daylight, in the open backyard, just a few steps away from my husband's bedroom window. I knew it was wrong, but nothing wrong had ever made me feel this real. We didn't make love that day, but I remembered how his eyes paused at the curve of my chest when I subconsciously tugged my neckline lower. I remembered how his hand lingered too long at my back, and I knew my body already missed him, even without touch. I didn't love Jake. Not quite. But I was beginning to need him, like a breath I could only take in a different kind of world. There are boundaries that don't exist in action, but in the moment right before we decide to cross them. I thought I had already crossed that line the night it rained, but that was just the first threshold. Behind it were doors I hadn't dared open, doors that demanded I face myself without excuses or filters. Daniel went on another business trip. I didn't ask where, I didn't ask for how long. He didn't ask if I needed anything either. I walked him to the door. We shared a hug light as air. "I'll call you," he said. I just smiled, not sure I even needed that call anymore. That night, Jake texted, "Do you want to come over and not leave tonight?" I stared at that message for a long time. No poetry, no pretending, just a raw, gentle invitation. I replied, "Yes." Jake's bedroom felt different this time, not because he had changed anything, but because I had. He was waiting at the door, not smiling, just watching, as if he already knew tonight would be nothing like before. There was no wine, no music, just breath. He came closer, didn't ask, didn't wait. He kissed me, not softly, but deeply, wet and warm, fire licking at restraint. His lips were hungry, but never rough, like he had spent the whole day holding himself back. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer. My chest pressed against his, my heartbeat threatening to escape my skin. We moved toward the bedroom, step by step, like a slow descent into surrender. Jake unbuttoned my blouse first, slowly, one at a time. His eyes never left my body, as if memorizing every inch of skin he uncovered. When he removed his shirt, I noticed the long scar beneath his ribs. I reached out to touch it. "Car accident," he whispered. I didn't ask more. I simply kissed the scar, a soft kiss that made Jake shudder. Our bodies tangled in the golden dim light. No more words, no more space, only breath, skin, and the half sounds escaping my throat, sounds I'd never made for anyone before. Jake was tender, but not timid. His lips traveled from my neck to my breasts, then lower, slower, and when his fingers found the place I was already wet, he whispered, "Your body's asking for more than words ever could." All I could do was breathe, ragged and unashamed, as my body answered him with every aching, trembling inch. When he entered me, time froze. No guilt, no fear, just belonging. I arched into him without shame, without control. We moved like a melody without music, only feeling. I moaned his name when I came, and for the first time, I said a man's name without holding anything back. Afterward, Jake held me close. His hands moved along my back like he was soothing something wounded long ago. I slept in his arms, deeply, peacefully, for the first time in months. The next morning, I woke first. I slipped into his shirt, stepped onto the balcony, and looked toward my house. Everything still looked tidy, still proper, still silent. And I knew. I no longer belonged there.
I don't remember exactly what time I got home. Just Jake's eyes when I left his bed. Soft, not asking me to stay, just a warm touch on my shoulder like a quiet goodnight. And me, I carried his scent on my skin like a perfume no one could see. Daniel came back 2 days later. I greeted him, like always, with a tired smile and silence neatly wrapped in routine. He gave me a half-hearted hug, asked the same handful of questions, like ticking boxes off a husband checklist. I answered each one, just enough to avoid suspicion, never enough to let him all the way in. The strangest part? He didn't notice I was different. My walk was softer, my skin glowed, my eyes no longer carried the dull haze of fatigue. But he still looked at me like a ghost of the wife he used to know and had long stopped noticing. That night, we lay beside each other, but didn't touch. 2 bodies, 2 worlds. I saw Jake again a few days later in a little bookstore downtown. Coincidence, but not really. He was standing between shelves of photography books, the familiar leather jacket, and the kind of gaze that made me forget my own name. He said, "I had a feeling you'd be here." Voice like wind brushing the back of my neck. I smiled, and I thought I should leave before someone sees us. Jake didn't stop me, that as I passed him, his fingers brushed mine. A fleeting touch no one else noticed, but it made my heart want to break open. That night, I sat alone in our bedroom. Daniel was downstairs watching sports, beer in hand, like always. I looked at our wedding photo on the nightstand. Me, 10 years ago. Young, dreamy, full of hope. And Daniel, his eyes once looked at me like I was the only thing that existed. And now? I closed my eyes. In the darkness, Jake appeared. His kisses, his hands, the way he said my name when his breath was short and deep inside me. But then, the guilt crept in, too. The questions no one was asking, but I couldn't avoid. What am I doing?
Do I have the right to break everything just because one man made me feel alive again? Or am I just running from myself? The next morning, Daniel made coffee, a rare gesture. He said, "You've been, different lately." I nearly dropped the mug. Different how? He shrugged. I don't know, just not the same. Something going on? I almost said no, but I stopped. I looked into his eyes. Really looked. For the first time in ages. And what I saw wasn't anger, wasn't hurt. It was emptiness. That night, I left the house. Not for Jake, not for Daniel. For me. I stood in front of Jake's door. Not knocking. Just standing there. In the dark. My wedding ring still on my hand.
The door opened before I could knock. Jake stood there, unsurprised, as if he knew I'd come, or maybe he just hoped I'd finally stop running from myself. I stepped inside, said nothing, just stood in the entryway, my hand still on the doorknob, like if I let go, I'd be forced to decide. Jake closed the door quietly. He said, "I wasn't sure you'd come." I answered softly, "Neither was I." He extended his hand but didn't touch me. "You don't have to say anything." I didn't. Instead, I moved closer, rested my head against his chest. He held me, tight, but not to possess me. More like he was anchoring me to a world where nothing else existed but us. I don't know who kissed whom first, but the moment our lips touched, I started to cry. Not from guilt, but because I knew I would never be the same again. Jake didn't ask questions. He just kissed me so tenderly, I thought I might dissolve. His hands moved along my back, touching places I used to hate about myself. But under his fingers, everything became worthy. Everything felt like it belonged. He whispered, "I don't need you to leave anyone. I just need you to be honest with what you feel." I couldn't answer. So I undressed him instead and let him undress every last piece of armor I had left. We made love like we were telling each other stories we had never spoken aloud. Not rushed, not frantic, but slow, deep, intentional. Jake looked into my eyes as he entered me, unblinking, unashamed, and I looked back. Finally, without fear of being seen. His hand cradled the back of my neck as I arched into him. His mouth kissed every inch of my skin like he was grateful for the permission to be there. We moved together like tide in shore, sometimes calm, sometimes crashing, but always whole. I lost count of how many times I came. All I knew was that each time I called his name like a prayer I didn't know I believed in. And afterward, when we lay tangled in sweat and breath and something that felt like truth, I knew I could never go back to the woman I was before sleep took us. I whispered, "If I never leave Daniel, will you still wait for me?" Jake looked at me for a long time. He said, "No, not angry, just honest. I won't wait, but I'll always be here." I nodded.
I had started living two lives. One was the wife standing in the kitchen, making coffee in the morning, asking about meetings, smoothing out the crease in his shirts. The other was the woman curled in a lover's lap, wearing nothing but his oversized shirt, listening quietly to the way someone else's heartbeat changed because of her. And the scariest part? I no longer knew which one was real. Daniel had started to notice, not through jealousy, but in those 1 second longer stares, longer than usual, as if he was searching for something he didn't have a name for. "You seem distant lately," he said during dinner. Instant pasta in plastic bowls, kitchen light harsh and cold. "Distant?" I asked, my voice soft, unreadable. "You smile less, you stare out the window more, and you haven't tried to be close lately." I set my fork down. "You really want to talk about being close, Daniel?" He went silent, like always. I stood up and washed my hands in ice-cold water, trying to scrub off something I knew couldn't be washed away. I saw Jake the next night. We didn't make love. We just lay there, his hand in mine, both of us staring at the ceiling like counting stars that weren't there. "I'm afraid you'll disappear," Jake said, not turning his head. "Why?" "Because I've never loved someone I couldn't keep." I turned to him, cupping his face in my palm. "I'm afraid too." "Of what?" "That if I let go of what I have, there'll be nothing left to hold on to." Jake said nothing. He simply pulled me into his arms, kissed my forehead, a kiss without desire, without possession, just a quiet truth. "I'm here." I got home late that night. Daniel was sitting in the dark, lights off. "Where were you?" he asked, voice lower than usual. I took off my coat and hung it up, like always. "I went for a walk." "For 3 hours?" I turned to him. "What do you want me to say, Daniel? That I'm tired of this? That I feel like a ghost in this house?" His eyes darkened. "Is there someone else?" I didn't answer. Sometimes silence is the loudest confession. Daniel nodded slowly, turning his face away. I didn't cry, and that was what scared me most.
I couldn't hide anymore. Not from Daniel, not from Jake, but from myself, from the truth that I had let everything go too far. Daniel had been silent for 3 days. No questions, no blame, but I could feel his eyes following me, like he was watching someone who might leave, yet unsure if he should stop her. And me, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. Jake texted me Saturday afternoon. If this is the last time, I still want to see you. Not for the body, but for the heart. I didn't answer right away. I sat by the window for a long time, watching the sun dip behind the neighbor's roof. Everything was so still, I could hear my own heartbeat. I had loved Jake, undeniably. But love doesn't always come with an escape route. I arrived at Jake's place just as the sky darkened. He opened the door without a word, stepping aside for me to enter. The house still held the breath of our last moments together, the scent of wood, his soap, the faint trace of me on the couch where we had once held each other for hours. He poured wine, but I shook my head. No need. I stepped closer to him, looked into his eyes, and saw something deep there. A sadness like a lake with no bottom. I'm not going to make promises, I said. I know. I don't know if I can leave everything behind, Jake. He nodded. But you also can't go back to who you were, can you? I bit my lip, a soft, honest nod. He didn't kiss me right away. We just stood there, close enough to breathe the same air. When his lips did touch mine, there was no urgency, no hunger, just farewell, spoken without sound. The last time we made love, it wasn't like any time before. Not wild, not desperate, but slow, deep, intentional. Like we both knew this would be the final time we'd ever feel each other like this. I undressed him, feeling the warmth of his skin one last time beneath my palms. He touched me as if memorizing everything, every curve, every scar, every breath. When he entered me, I didn't cry, but my throat closed up. We moved slowly, closely. No words. We spoke in heartbeats. And when I came, I didn't call his name. I whispered one word. Goodbye. After, I got dressed again. Didn't look in the mirror. Didn't turn around. Jake walked me to the door. He didn't reach for me, but I knew he was holding me with everything he had left. He said, I don't regret it. Neither do I. And I left.
I sat in the kitchen before sunrise. The lights were still off, only the first glow of morning slipping through the blinds. The house was silent, eerily so. Not because it was empty, but because it no longer felt like home. Daniel was still asleep, or pretending to be. I had spent the night thinking, every tick of the clock like the slow, steady beat of a heart I couldn't feel anymore. I had loved. I had betrayed. I had lived. And I had dreamed. I stood up and opened the drawer by the dining table. My wedding ring lay in my palm, lighter than I expected. I slipped it on again. It felt cold, foreign, as if I were putting on the old version of myself that I had already lost. I wasn't sure if I still loved Daniel, but I knew I no longer loved this marriage. We didn't hate each other, but sometimes love isn't enough. When Daniel came downstairs, he saw me standing there, calmer than I'd ever been. "You're up early," he said. I didn't sleep. We looked at each other. No anger, no tears, Just two people letting go. I know, Daniel said quietly. I nodded. I know too. No explanations, no confessions. I stepped closer and took his hand. I don't know where I'm going, but I need to go. Daniel looked at me, not to stop me, just to say, you deserve a life that feels like something, even if that life doesn't include me. I left with a small bag. I didn't go to Jake. I didn't call him. I needed to know I could stand on my own before leaning into anyone else. I rented a small place near the edge of town, birdsong in the morning, fresh-cut grass in the afternoon, and I wrote again. Not blog posts, but my story. A few weeks later, I got an email. No message, no subject line, just a photo. Me standing in the garden, holding a bouquet of roses, eyes closed, hair in the wind. Shot from afar. Blurry. But I knew it was Jake. He was still there, watching, not asking, not holding. I didn't go back, but I didn't shut the door. I just learned how to walk through it on my own.